Hey everyone, it's great to see you again. I hope you're doing well. I've been working on a few longer form videos over the past few weeks, but in that time I haven't stopped going to the comic book store. I have quite a backlog at this point of some of the things that I have read and have wanted to talk about. So I figured that I could come on here, do a really quick vlog, and talk about some of the comic books that I have been reading recently and some of the ones that have really stuck out to me and that I've really enjoyed. So without further ado, let's just go ahead and jump right in. And the first one that I want to talk about is one that I talked about in my last video when I had just read the first issue, and that is Black Cloak. Since I made my last video, I have bought the next 2 issues and read them, and it's safe to say at this point that I'm completely in love with this series. I love it so much. It's probably my favorite one of the spring so far. For those of you who don't know what Black Cloak is, it is a magical police procedural that's set in a fantasy world. The incident that kicks off the main story is the murder of one of the crowned royals who actually has a romantic past with the main character. The story's really starting to heat up with these next 2 issues. The bodies are starting to pile up, the evidence is starting to mount, there are more questions than there are answers, all of that really good stuff that you want to get with a police procedural. And you can tell that this is a really rich world and that so far they're holding a lot of the world building really close to their chest. So I'm also really excited to learn a little bit more about the setting and the history, because I'm sure that all of that will be revealed in plenty of time. We're starting to insert some political intrigue here and there, and I feel like we're starting to get into a mounting conspiracy that might be happening that our main characters are eventually going to uncover. I really have no idea where this one's going to go, but I'm so excited to see where it does. And at this point, I'm going to be looking for this one on the shelves every single month. If you're thinking about a comic book that is just starting out, that you've been wanting to try and you want something different, this is the one to go read. I can't speak highly enough of it. But speaking of police procedurals that are a little bit more disappointing, let's go ahead and talk about Clear by Scott Snyder. Now, I love Scott Snyder. I mean, his run on Batman is my favorite run of Batman ever. I love American Vampire. I love some of the graphic novels that he's done. I really enjoy Scott Snyder as a writer, which kind of made it all the more disappointing when this one didn't quite do it for me. This one is a detective story that's set in kind of a dystopian near future set in the 2050s in San Francisco. The whole conceit of this world is that virtual reality has made a really big impact in shaping the world, and almost everybody uses it nearly every day. But our main character, who is a private investigator, he is considered what's called clear, which means that he doesn't use any virtual reality to augment what he sees every day, because essentially this world has a technology that was invented that allows virtual reality to alter whatever you see throughout the day. If you want this drab, dreary world to look like Middle Earth, or to look like a Star Wars sci-fi adventure, then you can do that. But there are some clears who choose to see the world as it is. I think my problem with like near future sci-fi is that it always feels a little too pop culture-y. I can tell that when this was written, VR and the metaverse was a much bigger issue and much more in the public discourse than it is now. And I think that now a lot of people's fears and frustrations about the rise of VR are less prominent than it seems like they were when this was written. I just don't find the world that compelling or the main character that interesting. And unfortunately, by the end, there wasn't really anything that was begging for me to get the second issue. If I have absolutely nothing else on my plate, then I might give this one a shot. But if not, I'll probably pass on this one, which again is a little disappointing because I know what I've seen out of Scott Snyder before. If this whole sci-fi dystopia that is set around the use of VR had a little bit more teeth to it and a little more thought behind it, then I think it could be really thought-provoking. But unfortunately, it falls a bit flat for me. Now, switching gears a bit on the fantasy front rather than the crime or the sci-fi front, I checked out 2 books, one called Godfell and one called Stoneheart. And kind of like Clear, I think both of these fell a bit flat for me because I don't think that they developed their worlds enough to really bring me in and get me invested in it. Stoneheart and Godfell both take up pretty immense fantasy worlds. In fact, on the inside cover of Stoneheart, you have this gigantic map that kind of shows how massive and inhabited and diverse this world is. But I think in both of these cases, I wasn't super compelled by either of the main characters to really feel like their story was something worth following. Now, I will put an asterisk on that and add that both of these have really strong concepts. So Stoneheart, at least from what we know from the first issue, it's about a girl who had tapped into some sort of ancient and evil magic that had begun to consume her and turn her into kind of this monstrous figure. What had happened is that the council in her community had kind of suppressed this power with magic and then wiped her memory and then sent her off into another community so that they could hopefully help her start over. And it seems like that kind of ancient evil power is still inside of her, but she has lapses and holes in her memory where she doesn't quite exactly know what's going on. Again, it seems like this is a giant world, but I just didn't find it worth exploring. I didn't feel like there was anything unique about this fantasy world, or that there were elements to the world building that really kept me asking questions and made me want to investigate it more. Godfell is pretty similar. The entire premise of this is that literally in this fantasy world, a gigantic god fell from the sky. So all of the warring nations of this world, they go to this gigantic dead body of this god that fell from the sky, which is so big that it's like several cities being smushed together. And they start warring over the different parts of this body and trying to divvy it up to each nation. And so that's the main conflict. But again, I didn't feel that kind of urging where there's so much about this world that I want to know that I just have to get issue 2. It's a really cool concept, but I'm just not invested enough to get the next issue. If you're looking for a new fantasy comic book, then I would probably recommend Stoneheart over Godfell, but at the end of the day, neither of them really provided what I needed. Now, on the other hand, in the world of horror, I read a new comic book called Harrower, and I loved this one. Now, this one takes place in a small town that has this legendary spooky figure named the Harrower, and all of the young people of the town kind of take all of these stories about the Harrower as these fairy tale stories that they were told as kids to kind of keep them in line and to scare them into obeying their parents. Kind of like all of the old European folk tales that functioned in much the same way. But it's clear that all of the adults of the town know something that the kids don't, and it's all very mysterious and spooky and creepy, and all of the parents give off just really weird vibes. The story takes place on Halloween night, which I am such a sucker for, and all of the main characters are kind of piled in their car and go into a party when their car breaks down on the side of the road in a place that has very little cell reception. And your mind can probably imagine where things are going to go from there, but there were quite a few surprises thrown in and some pretty gruesome scenes. And I just found this one such a breath of fresh air when it comes to horror comics. And I can tell that there is a lot more behind the lore of the Harrower that we aren't being told yet. And I can't wait to read the second issue because I feel like things are only going to get crazier from here. Another horror comic I tried out was Purple Oblivion. And honestly, I just really have nothing to say about this one. I was confused, the concept seemed weird, I really couldn't even tell you what it's about yet. I think there's something to be said for having like a weird, psychedelic, acid trip, strange kind of horror comic to read, but this one just really didn't do it for me. I wouldn't recommend it. If you're looking for a horror comic to read, I would much rather go with Harrower than try and pick up this one or even the second issue. But moving on from new series and going into ongoing series, I did buy volume 2 of Something is Killing the Children, and I love it so much. If you haven't heard of Something is Killing the Children, the best way that I can describe it is kind of like John Wick meets monster hunting. The story kind of kicks off where this rogue monster hunter named Erica Slaughter, which is a cool name by the way, she comes to this little town in Wisconsin called Archer's Peak, where it seems like something is killing the children. And so together with another one of the kids, she eventually tracks down where this monster is and what it is and how to kill it. That's kind of the initial premise of the story. The situation with the monster ends up becoming more and more dire in this second volume, but we also get some really interesting world building because it seems like Erica Slaughter, which is just one of the monster hunters, is kind of the tip of the iceberg of a much larger world that we're kind of slowly being rolled into. I know that there's an additional ongoing series called House of Slaughter that expands a lot of the world of this comic book, but horror action is kind of the genre that I would lump this into. I think it's one of the best out there right now. I was kind of skeptical about continuing this this series after Volume 1, but once I got Volume 2, there's no doubt in my mind that I'm really going to be following this one from here on out. So if you want something that's kind of less horror, more action heavy, and has really cool, unique character design, definitely go with this one. I love it so much. Finally, I also checked out the second part of 3 of the first Inferno Girl Red series. I'd say that this is a tie right now with Black Cloak in terms of my favorite running comic right now. And I think that I like this one so much because the characters are just so strong. The writing is just so good and so believable that you really do feel like this character is in high school. But one of the unsung things about this book is the chemistry that the main character has with her mom. I think a lot of times in stories like these, you can have the main character and their parents always be in conflict, but this one is such a breath of fresh air because the relationship that she has with her mother is just so healthy, and her mother is such a big supporter of her, both in terms of her personal life and in terms of her superheroing, which she's still kind of learning how to do. Inferno Girl Red Part 3 is going to be coming out this month, I believe. And so there's still plenty of time to hit the ground floor with this one. And if you're looking for a fresh take on superheroes, I would definitely recommend this one. That's about it for this week. Like I said, I'm going to be having a lot more long form videos coming out as I kind of finish up the scripts and start shooting and editing those. But for now, if anything that I mentioned sounded cool or interesting, then absolutely go check them out. If you disagree with me with my takes on Stoneheart or Clear, or if you agree with me and love Black Cloak just as much as I do, then let me know down in the comments below. But until I see you next time, thanks for watching and have a good one.